Hello friends, this is Growl. The World of Warcraft Shadowlands beta was just hit with a huge batch of changes, balance updates and otherwise, and in this video, I'm going to go through what I think impacts the game the most. Right now, with the Covenant situation, it's really important that balance and tuning are as tight as they can be when the game launches, and with less than 2 months away from release, people are really wondering if that's going to happen. There's quite a few balance changes in this build. I'll highlight some of the ones that I think are most meaningful, and I'll also leave a link in the description to the full list of changes if you guys want to dig through and see what changed in your class or spec. The list is quite messy, as there were tons and tons of tooltip and aura adjustments. First, for Vengeance, they added that Shear and Fracture generate more fury during meta. This is a welcome change to Demon Hunter, however, as one of the leading tanks right now, it's starting to look more and more like a Vengeance-dominated first season. There was also quite a few PvP talent changes that I'm not going to comment on because, well, I'm bad at PvP. Balanced Druid Celestial Alignment now grants 15% haste instead of crit, and then Incarn, if talented, adds in that 10% crit chance. This is a slight nerf to Incarn, but I'm sure the Boomy Theory crafters will have the full details for the best builds when the raid is released, so I'm not worried too much about that now. Moonfire also got a slight damage buff for all specs. It was actually somewhat noticeable in some of the dungeon runs I was doing, with Moonfire doing over 25% of my damage as a Resto Druid. Hunter's Mark got a cooldown applied to it, and now the cooldown resets if the target dies. Some hunters were complaining about this being on the GCD, and now instead of making it more smooth to use, it's actually clunkier. This is a small quality of life annoyance for PvE, but I can see how this could have some negative effects in PvP, since it's much more common that you switch targets without it dying. Zen Meditation, one of the situational Brewmaster defensive abilities, can now be cast while moving. This makes it a bit more useful when kiting mobs with very high stagger, and I can see this being a welcome change. There are also some Mistweaver changes, but Mistweaver is in just such a buggy state on the beta right now, I don't know anybody that's even trying to play it. It's a bit confusing to me that they haven't even fixed some of the major issues by now. Protection Paladins had a few specific changes regarding how they generate holy power. In a previous update, they changed Avenger's Shield to grant 1 holy power every time it struck a new enemy, but in order to compensate for this immense increase in holy power, they removed the holy power gain from Judgment. Avenger's Shield is an ability that strikes multiple enemies, and is often used immediately on pull from tanks looking to grab threat on a pack of mobs. This change helped prop Paladins a lot in Mythic Plus, giving them a way to generate large amounts of holy power and threat immediately on pull. On single target, however, especially in raid fights, this change wasn't as well received, since it turned Judgment into what was basically just a filler ability. In the recent beta patch, this change was reverted. Avenger's Shield no longer generates additional holy power, but in Judgment does again. This is good news for raid, but bad news for Mythic Plus. Paladins were already one of the more fragile tanks for high keys, and now it's even harder for them to generate holy power, especially on pull. As a somewhat of a response to this, they've moved some mitigation from Shield of the Righteous to Consecration. This is an alright change, however, I felt like Paladins were in a good place for Mythic Plus dungeons before, and now I think they may fall behind other specs like Vengeance or Blood Decay. They were a bit squishy, but put out a lot of damage and had some unique utility. I worry now that with the slower holy power regeneration, they will end up being even squishier and more difficult to play. In some testing we did yesterday, it seemed extremely difficult to execute some of the pulls we were doing just days earlier. Another small change, Mana Tide Totem's range was nerfed to only 10 yards. This makes it something that you definitely want to be coordinating as a group instead of just throwing it down. It's a bit unfortunate because its effect is kind of underwhelming already. It only grants a small amount of mana, but I can see why this change was made, and honestly it may make it even more flavorful. There were also some big Covenant changes, however not nearly as many as the community hoped for. The big one is Convoke the Spirits for Druid was nerfed from 16 spells to 12 spells. This ability dishes out 12 random Druid spells in a short time window, depending on what form you're in while casting it. The reduction to 12 is not just a 25% power level decrease, but also a reliability decrease. Since the spells are random, 16 ensured you'd nearly always get some healing or damage depending on what you needed. Now, with only 12 spells, not only is the ability overall less powerful on average, but you also are more likely to get a dud Convoke that doesn't do enough healing or damage that you were hoping for. Personally, for Resto Druid specifically, I think this ability was pretty busted, and by far it was the best Covenant ability. It was a bit disheartening to see Resto Druid have such a powerful, multifaceted ability, and then log on my Mistweaver or Resto Shaman, and looking at all the Covenants being like, these don't even help me. I think for Resto, it will still be a powerful choice. However, we will see other Druid specs possibly opt for other Covenants now. Phalanx Stomp for Mistweaver has been changed a bit too. Something about a 30-second recharge and having one charge instead of a cooldown. Anything to do with Mistweaver is pretty disheartening at this point. Mistweaver is in such an unfinished state right now, it's almost certainly going to be an outlier when the game goes live because there's been virtually no ability to test it. Some of the many bugs include Chi-Ji healing itself but not you, Expel Harm being a button that's not even worth pressing, Touch of Death only working if you are meleeing the target, Enveloping Breath getting extended by talents that shouldn't interact with it, Blackout Kicks doing less damage, broken tooltips, Covenant abilities not working as intended, and the list goes on. Shout out to all the Mistweaver mains trying to get this stuff fixed right now. Monk is definitely the class I'm worried about the most. The Demon Hunter Night Fae Covenant ability, The Hunt, also got a bit of a rework, reducing the cooldown and adding a small AoE component to it. I don't have much to say about this because in the current beta build, it doesn't really work well, so we haven't been able to test it. It seems like some of the Night Fae abilities have been an effort to add some more class flavor, however at this point it seems like they're adding a lot more problems than they're worth. Less than 2 months, guys. The Covenant dungeon buffs, a very heavily discussed topic in the Mythic Plus community, are being changed just a bit. I think they want to make all of these options feel, well, optional. However, as we know with the WoW community, if there's ever an opportunity to min-max, we're going to take it. I'm not going to go too in-depth here on each one, however, they significantly nerfed the Anima Exhaust Orbs from Necrotic Wake, which I mentioned on the channel earlier. They also reduced the power of Sinfall Boon from Sanguine Depths, but also increased its duration since it was quite hard to make use of. Both of these things I think are welcome changes, and I'm really glad to see Blizzard giving them attention. And now, on the topic of professions, many old potions no longer work above level 50. This is probably good news for the crafters and gatherers doing the new content, since lots of the old potions people used are being reworked and re-implemented. There's one catch though, they're using this opportunity to slide in some balance adjustments to these consumables. I'll go over some of the more noticeable changes, at least for dungeon content now. First is speed potions. These were previously a 150% increase to movement speed for 8 seconds. They were commonly used by tanks to set up larger pulls to be able to escape mobs for a short time. They are being re-implemented, however the speed increase has been nerfed dramatically from 150% to 70%. On top of a potion cooldown being moved to 5 minutes, this makes using speed potions as a tank pretty unappealing. I've even been known to pop one for a long run back when there's no checkpoint, and that's probably out of the question now too. Second is free action potions. These make you immune to stun effects for a short time, and more importantly you can use them while stunned. These were awesome to have in your bags, especially for solo content, if you get hit by some silly stun because you were staring at your other monitor watching your favorite YouTuber. It was also great for tanks, being able to get out of some stuns before they instantly die. The new version of these potions cannot be used while stunned. I think potions getting you out of a stun are a bit cheesy, so I don't mind them being removed, however it's definitely a quality of life loss for me. If I want to do solo content as a healer, I'll definitely get stunned occasionally just because I don't even have an interrupt. Sneaking potions were also removed, however they're mostly irrelevant now because they would have had the same 5-minute cooldown that invis potions have. The Volcanic Affix has been changed back, at least the damage portion of it. They recently changed it to damage scaling on key level, and now it's changed back to doing only 20% of your health, down from 40% in Battle for Azeroth. I think this is probably a good change, since the disruption from the new Volcanic is already such a huge downside. I'm still very interested to see how they can make this affix work in dungeons, considering being able to fly really high in the air on demand will likely cause some game-breaking skips, like in Battle for Azeroth when people could skip the Shadow of Zul mini-boss at the end of King's Rest. Now for a very hot topic, the Covenant changing questline has been added to the beta. And I might be in the minority here, but I think this is a pretty big win. It looks like it's going to be a small series of time-gated, reputation-like quests where you have to complete world quests, kill dungeon bosses in an area, and possibly other objectives. The full quest chain hasn't been revealed yet, however, I'm guessing it's going to be gated about a week's time. One important note is that you do not lose your current covenant when you're doing this chain. Let's say you were Venthyr and you want to switch back to Kyrian. Even if it takes a week, you will still be a member of Venthyr for the full duration, so it's not like you're being forced to give up your covenant ability early. Here's how the covenant system works right now. You select a covenant at the end of the main quest line and immediately get access to that covenant's abilities. If you decide that that covenant isn't for you, you can switch to any other covenant nearly instantly with no effort required. After that, if you change your mind and want to go back after abandoning a covenant, you have to complete this long quest line to return. To me, the system works well for most of the player base, as it allows you the freedom to switch if you choose wrong or if a covenant gets a balance change after you have selected. It also allows you to change if you shift focus in the game. Let's say you mostly play dungeons, but then you end up meeting some good PvP friends and start to enjoy arenas more, but your covenant choice doesn't do much in PvP, you can immediately swap to a covenant that better suits you. The only thing it doesn't allow for is switching fluidly from day to day. A lot of multi-speccers will be disappointed by this, but part of the meaningful choice meme is having to decide what your character specializes in, and with that, also what they aren't good at. I can understand how people might be a bit frustrated that their off-spec isn't as effective or powerful because of this. However, we've gone full expansions with specs like Feral or Enhancement being basically second-class citizens in certain content types, so this won't be something that the WoW community isn't familiar with already. That covers everything. What a long list. If you made it this far, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, remember to subscribe so you don't miss out on more beta updates as well as guides and walkthroughs when the game is released. Happy keying!